Hey everybody, my name is Eddie Phillips and I am Shield Network Cybersecurity Evangelist. Why evangelist? Because cybersecurity trainer is so boring. And not only that, but at Shield, trainer just doesn't do it justice. We're so passionate and so enthusiastic about helping businesses out in fending off cyber threats. We honestly believe that if we can just keep reaching out to companies, we can put a huge dent in the profits that we're seeing these scammers take from honest businesses, across the continent. So anyway, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through our standard cybersecurity awareness training. The only problem with this is, the only reason I was hesitant to do this in the first place is because we update this all the time. So what you're going to see is, March 17th or 18th? And so this is a point in time snapshot of our training. We do update this several times per month just to make sure we're on top of the latest threats. We're going to go through this. It's still going to be valuable. If you guys have questions, drop us a line and we are definitely here for you. So what is cybersecurity awareness training? Cybersecurity awareness training is all about educating everyday computer users on the threats that we're seeing every day. We're now seeing 90% of the threats that come through are coming through because of email. It's no longer perimeter security, which is your firewall. It's no longer just application security, making sure that you're updated. While all those things are extremely important, and I'm not saying that anyone should back off of those, we need to keep on top of each and every one of those normal cybersecurity issues. But now it comes down to social engineering. It comes down to making sure that staff are not clicking on malicious links, downloading malicious files, giving away their financial information, giving away their credentials, which then propagates the whole process. Billions, trillions are being made off of the backs of honest companies. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through, like I say, pretty much our standard cybersecurity awareness training. And again, this is aimed at everyday computer users. If you use email, this is for you. We're not going to get really hot and heavy into any technical details. We're going to keep it nice and light and move along pretty quick. So without further ado, let's get started. First of all, I guess to further introduce myself, I've been in the IT industry for a really long time, back in 95, I suppose. Since then, I have started my own business. My own business merged with another business, and we're now Shield Networks. And the biggest part, and honestly the favorite part of my job, is to do the cybersecurity awareness training with all the COVID-19 stuff going on and people being encouraged to work from home and large gatherings being discouraged and even outlawed in some places. A lot of my presentations have been canceled or at least postponed. And in light of all of that, what we're also seeing is more threats. We're seeing scammers take advantage of this situation. So I couldn't think of a better time or more important time to put this sort of presentation together. So let's get going. All right, so every week or so, I put up a very short video. There are videos that will talk about some of the latest headlines you're seeing in the news, some of the latest threats that are out there. I highly encourage you to follow me either on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Just find Shield Networks or Eddie Phillips. Some of the details are right here. And this is the thing, right? We're seeing new stuff. Maybe not every day, but certainly every week. And I'm addressing those there. Some of the latest things. We try to keep it under a couple of minutes. We present a current issue, current headline. We talk about the best ways to avoid that. Anyways, check that out. And here's my contact information if you guys need anything else from me. All right, here's our agenda. So we're going to talk about email. We're going to talk a lot about email. We're going to talk about phishing, impersonation, malware, ransomware, the most common things that we're seeing. And we're going to look at some screenshots, some really great examples of what you will actually see out in the wild. And then we're going to talk about some very practical ways to defend against them and to watch out for them and the things you should do. We're going to talk about web threats and Internet of Things. We'll go into definitions and details later on. Again, this is not a heavy technical presentation. This is meant for everyone from the accounting department to janitorial to the CEO. especially CEO and the C levels, because a lot of times some of these attacks are targeted directly at them, as well as CFOs and anyone who's in charge of bookkeeping or the financials. Social engineering. We're going to talk about what social engineering is and the more common aspects and the more common threats that are out there, a lot like the CRA or IRS phone calls that we're getting. Recovery and prevention. We'll just briefly touch on some of those topics, not really the target audience here, but I do want to mention them just so that we do acknowledge the solutions that are out there. Practical steps you can do right now, meaning that there are simple items that everyone can be doing right now to protect themselves and fend off some of the most common ways that people are losing out on money or getting their credentials stolen. So we'll talk about those. And then we'll talk about the summary. We'll summarize everything, and we'll talk about the future and where we're going. Okay, so let's start off. Email threats. 90% of infections and scams are coming through your email. So phishing. Phishing with a PH is the process of pretending to be a trusted client, vendor, organization like the CRA or eBay or Amazon or anybody that you would normally do business with, and they're really not that person. They're trying to scam you out of a few things, and we'll talk about those in a second. Impersonation. Now, there's a subtle difference between phishing and impersonation. Impersonation is also pretending to be like you're a trusted vendor, client, or sometimes even an internal fellow peer. And the way that works is it has a lot to do with the way that the email addresses and the domain names are displayed. We're going to go to some really good examples in just a second. And lastly, malware, ransomware. We're seeing that all the time. So malware is also delivered through email, and if you're not properly secured, it can be as simple as clicking on a file that you receive and getting infected. Phishing, common strategies. Spoofing. Spoofing is huge. Spoofing is the concept where when you look at your email and you see the from header, so you can see who the email is from, and that can be easily changed. Anyone with even a little bit of technical knowledge can easily change that to look like it came from anyone. They don't have to have rights to that domain, the Microsoft.com. They can make it look like it came from Bill Gates if they wanted to. So keeping that in mind should also make you think that to be weary of anything that's within the email. You can't always trust what's in the header. Now, there are technical tools out there that your IT company or IT department should be putting in place to make sure that they are warning or filtering out when spoofing happens. Let's see. Lastly, I want to also special note on the CEO scam. The CEO scam happens quite a bit where you receive an email that looks like it comes from the CEO or other authority figure in your business asking you to pay an invoice or purchase Google Play cards. We've seen that happen and we've seen people fall for it. So this is where phishing really comes into play, and really being careful about watching the headers and not necessarily believing what you see in the from area. So here we go. Let's do two birds with one stone here. Phishing and the coronavirus. These are becoming popular with the scammers because obviously it's a concern in everybody's mind. We're all concerned about the latest news. Some of us are charitable and we want to help out those. So we're seeing fake and malicious emails coming out to try to rip you off of either your money or to deliver a payload or an attachment that is infecting your computer. And these are the types of things where you can see right here in the example where this one is actually carrying a payload or a file that's infectious. Right? So being careful of any sort of attachments. Links are a big deal. Again, in these specific scenarios, there are actually some technologies out there that can help. But the problem with these is a lot of them are reactive, which means that there's a point in time where these threats are in the wild and no one knows to look for them, or they haven't been discovered that they're malicious yet. So being very, very aware. So let's have a look at this email really quick. So this is based off a customer we actually have now. This customer came to us when they actually lost out on a large sum of money because of a deal they were doing. So we're going to look at Everyday Co. It's a company in Canada, and they're starting up a relationship with what do we have here? Aussie Co., a company down in Australia. And what happened is Alice was working with this company from Everyday Company, and they built up a relationship. She was selling a product, a very niche product, and Aussie Co. agreed. They liked the idea, and it got down to the very final steps, to the point where Everyday Co. sent an invoice and wire transfer information. Well, immediately after sending that information, Aussie Co. got this email. Look at the details that are in here. So it looks like it came from Alice Jones. It has her signature. It has her picture as part of the profile. It's written like Alice would write her emails. But what did you notice that was different between these two emails? I don't know if anybody caught it. I know when I do my physical in-house presentation, I usually carry one bag of candy with me because usually about one person catches it, and that's the domain. You'll notice that they subtly changed the domain. Now this is called impersonation. And this is one of those things where we, as humans, we assume a lot of things. And we've been interacting with Alice, and the email looks the same. We have no real reason to pay attention to the domain name after her email address, at the end of her email address, every single time. The problem in this case is that someone was watching their email. In this particular case, they actually had inside information to what was going on back and forth, and were waiting for their opportunity. Unfortunately, Aussie Co. fell for this. They sent the money through this new wire transfer information, and a couple of days later, Alice called up the company and said, "Hey, I thought we were moving forward." And Aussie Co. said, "Yeah, we sent the payment a couple of days ago." And they said, "Well, of course, no, you didn't." So it ended up becoming a big forensic investigation. Everyday, obviously I've changed the names, but Everyday Company contacted us, and we were helping them figure out what happened. Unfortunately, Aussie Co. did not recover that money. They could not stop the payment. It was already gone through. So there are some real life consequences to these types of emails that come through. So just a few more examples. Swapping in, and see, the big problem with this is that there's nothing to stop someone from going out there and registering a domain name that is very similar to yours or your clients. So here's some common examples or strategies. Replacing a W with two V's, or adding an S or dropping an S from your domain name, or instead of a lowercase d, a C and an L right next to each other, where your mind would just pass over it and assume that it was just the same domain that you've been receiving. Malware ransomware. So this is where we're talking about payloads or attachments that are with your email. The most common way to get this malware is through email. There are a couple of other ways, but those circle around and are protected by the perimeter security or firewalls we spoke about before, as well as making sure that access to your network is locked down. Again, 90% of the infections are coming through your email, so you want to be cognitive of the attachments that are being sent. Now, what is ransomware? Ransomware, if you don't know, if you haven't been really researching it, ransomware is an application or a malware or a virus that gets onto your computer. It installs silently in the background, and what it does is it churns away looking for every file that it has access to. It starts with the local computer, and then it looks out to your server access. What files do you have on the server? And it starts encrypting them, meaning that it's locking them down. It's changing them so that they can't actually be opened in such a way that you can't decrypt them without a decryption key. And then at the very end of this process, you're going to see a window very similar to what you're seeing here, where the scammers are now ransoming back your data for an X amount of Bitcoin or money. The last thing we want to be doing is paying off these types of scammers, because it just propagates their business model, right? So we want to be able to recover from these sorts of things. But the first step is being aware. I'm going to beat the word aware to death in this presentation, because we need to be aware of what we're opening, of what we're doing, because we're creatures of habit, right? Just because something looks the same, it doesn't mean it is the same. Unfortunately, we tend to treat it like it is. So there's something called targeted threat protection that we use with our clients. And what that is it's a process where email passes through our targeted threat protection system and we scan it for attachments that may be infected, but we also scan the links that are embedded in emails or files, and then our system follows those links to see if they are a threat. Now, it's a fantastic system. It works very well. But what's happened now is that because these scammers have, every inspiration to make it better. I mean, the money that they're making off this, they're investing the time, they're investing the resources to figure out the best way to get around the security measures that are out there. So now what we're seeing is that the scammers are taking legitimate services like OneDrive, like Google Drive, like Dropbox, and they are embedding their a file into those services, sending that. So even when our services scan them to see if it's legitimate, it looks like OneDrive. Well, that's a trusted source, so it gets through. Now, there are other ways to lock this down, but we need to be aware that the scammers out there are changing things all the time. So even though you might get a link that looks familiar, if you're not expecting it, let's talk about this right now. I think I might address this later on, but I really got to jump all over this. So the biggest ways that you're being scammed are it looks familiar, right? They're tricking you into thinking they are somebody that they're not. B, urgency. Urgency is huge. Click this now, or you're going to lose access to your services. Meaning, we'll get an email from Microsoft. It looks like it comes from Microsoft that click this link because we're going to delete your account, or pay this bill right away, otherwise, there's going to be impacts. Anything that rushes you should start firing off red flags, and you should be paying more attention to what you're doing. Our biggest, especially when it comes to the CEO scan, our biggest suggestion right now is to have a 2-layer process when you're approving any sort of financial commitment or payouts, especially if they're big dollars, that you should be running it through a secondary set of eyes to get secondary approval to make sure things make sense. But this ransomware, this is impacting companies from 1 or 2 computers to thousands of computers, because it's so these scammers have taken a page out of the lean book. I don't know if there's any manufacturers out there that are watching this, but out of the lean means making things as efficient as possible. So what they've done is they've automated so much of this that they can basically target anyone who values the data on their computer. That's who they're targeting. Again, just another example where you can kind of see some of the clues when you get a link. If you do end up going to a trusted source, being aware of what you're clicking on. So if you hold your mouse over this document, in this particular case, this is on a Microsoft OneDrive. This is something that we have just received from one of our clients, showing us something that they had received. And you can see this wasn't even a dental's office, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's about a dental office. It was a manufacturer, and luckily they did catch this. I did follow it, and we did notice that the web browser in this case did help prevent it. And some of the web browsers are giving us a hand out there. Chrome, Safari, Firefox, the newest version of Edge. They are attempting, but again, this is all reactive. We still need to be aware of what we're clicking on. Just a note here, even if it's a trusted site that you normally go to, if suddenly you get a warning from your antivirus or a warning from your browser, don't proceed, because we're also seeing that websites are getting hacked. So something you may have trusted previously, don't go to the website just because you've always been able to go to the website. Some sites, even high profile sites, are being hacked. It's worth waiting. Email attack prevention. So this is where I talked about some of the solutions that are out there. I won't go over this again. But if you have questions on this, or if you're concerned that you're not being protected at the level that you should be at an email perspective, talk to your IT company, talk to your IT department, make sure they're putting in the measures to protect your company as much as possible through an automated point of view. Again, this training is so key. So many people are just either not educated on the threats that are out there, or are just too trusting of the existing services. Web threats. So not a lot new here. This is not how we're seeing a lot of threats come in, but they are out there. And what I mean by web threats are, I guess last year, I guess probably maybe about a year and a half ago, the biggest thing was threats and malware through ads. We still want to be careful. We want to be careful of the sites that you're going to. If your company has not implemented any sort of web filtering, you want to enable web filtering. If you're not doing secure scan of secure data, so in other words, when you go to your bank and you log into your bank and you see it's got that green either title bar at the top or it's green where the address is, that tells you that the connection between you and your bank is secured and that data is encrypted. The problem is that it's just way too easy for anybody to make an encrypted website. Meaning that if you're not scanning the secure data on your network, you could be vulnerable. I'm not going to get into that. Again, this is not meant to be technically intensive, but there are questions you need to ask your IT company. Internet of Things. Again, this is probably a little bit too technical for this presentation, but it's something you should be aware of, especially if you are in charge of purchasing or in charge of new products or features to implement to make your staff's life easier. Things like vending machines. We have a CNC manufacturing company that has a vending machine, meaning that they have a third-party supplier that provides them with blades. They have a vending machine, so that every time someone needs a blade, they go to the machine, they pull one out, and when the stock gets low, it sends a signal back to the vendor to let them know to order more. Those kinds of things can be dangerous if they're not secured properly. You can't just take a piece of machinery, plug it into your network where all your computers are, and expect to be safe. Those things should be segregated so that it's not on the same network as your servers or your workstations. Those are the things to be aware of. Social engineering. Just quickly on this one, phone calls or texts. We're seeing texts, phone calls and texts from Facebook, Google, the IRS, the CRA, anyone that's trying to trick you into giving control of your computer, trick you into sending them money, urgency, like there's a warrant out for your arrest, or your social security or social insurance number has been misused and you've been misrepresented. Those are the types of things that cause us as people to get emotionally involved in what we're reading. And what we need to do is take a step back. We need to make sure that the logical side of our brain is engaged to make sure that we're not being scammed. Social engineering, again, fake infected websites. Going to a website and you'll see a pop-up that says, "You've been infected, call us immediately." And they misrepresent themselves as Google or as Microsoft. They're looking to engage that emotional part of your brain, that there's an urgency, the first thing, and you want to solve that. So you want to step in and you want to get those fixed. That's where they're getting us. That's where they're tricking people into clicking on the links, giving away their information. Not if, but when. So this is me several years ago. I was heavily involved in rodeo, and we used to have a saying in rodeo that it's not if you get hurt, it's when and how bad. And I have to say that, unfortunately, the same thing has to be said about cybersecurity and your network. It's not if you're attacked, it's when and how bad. So you need to be ready. You need to be aware, and you need to have the tools in place to either A, defend yourself, or B, recover if an attack gets through. Prevention and recovery. Again, this isn't the presentation for these types of really technical or solution details, but we do have a cybersecurity checklist. If you're interested in that, send me an email and I'd be happy to send that to you. This is something that you can take to your IT department, you can take to your IT company and sit down with them and make sure that you're covered off. A recovery checklist. I actually have a recovery checklist as well. I didn't mention that here. I just mentioned a short one, but I actually do have an extended version. So if you want to ask for that as well, please email me and I'll send that to you. But just some quick hard rules about backups. You want to have multiple copies. You want to have it stored in a system that is not like your everyday operating system. So for example, a lot of people are using OneDrive and Dropbox and Google Drive as your backup. Those are not backup solutions. Those are synchronization solutions. And it offers a very small level of protection. The problem is that if you get something like ransomware, it's going to encrypt those files in your OneDrive or your Google Drive, and it's going to replicate them. Microsoft and Google have some level of recovery, but I'm going to tell you right now that it is slow. We haven't had the greatest, or seen people have the greatest success with it, and we've always ended up falling back on our tried and true backup and disaster recovery solutions. So you want to have it set up as a different system. And lastly, you need to have something what's called air gapped, meaning that there's no physical connection between your computer and your backups. So some sort of an offline or cloud-based storage solution, again, that isn't directly connected. OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox are cloud-based, but you're directly connected to them. So whatever your computer gets, those files are going to get as well. Okay, what should you do right now? I love these. These are practical items that everybody watching this can take. First off, enable two-factor authentication. What's two-factor authentication? You probably already use it and maybe just don't know what it's called. Google accounts, I'm going to use that as an example. The picture right here is from Google Authenticator, which is a authenticator app that Google has, but there are a few of them out there. In fact, there are some really hardcore ones that use an actual physical key. Those ones are awesome too, but you need to enable two-factor authentication as a start. This is where not only do you have a user ID and password for a service, but you're also required to provide a 6-digit or more code in order to access it. Twitter uses this, Google uses this, Microsoft uses this. A ton of services that you use every day use this. So the best way to do this, log into that service, go to your profile settings, and you're going to see security. And somewhere in there is going to be something called either two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Enable it now. This is the best way to make it a lot more difficult for scammers to get into your accounts. Secure your cell phone. This is huge. So this one is something that we're seeing people are actually able to get around the two-factor, or scammers get around the two-factor authentication. It's a lot more work. It doesn't happen nearly as often, but this is a great step to do anyways. Call your cell phone provider, set up a password or PIN number before anyone can make changes or port your cell phone number. So in one of my videos, if you go back to the videos I talked about earlier, I talked about an investor who was investing in Bitcoin and ended up losing $23 million because someone ported his cell phone number over to another cell phone and was able to access his Bitcoin investing account and stole $23 million. So that's a pretty huge example. I also talked about recently someone, just an everyday person, who lost access to their cell phone, and someone went on a shopping spree with their Amazon account and they lost a few $100s on their credit card. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to have millions of dollars. They're after anybody and anyone with an unsecured account. Get a password management app. So here's the thing, right? I mean, I know what it's like. I've been using passwords for years and years, and I've even done in the past some of the bad habits of simplified passwords, incrementing passwords, meaning like, password 1, password 2, or just substituting a number, or reusing passwords. That one is so key, because what's happening right now is when a scammer or a hacker gets your information, they're going to run out with that password and they're going to try it against other services. And if you're reusing passwords, you're at a huge risk. Simplified passwords, very easy to crack. So my suggestion is to use a password management app. There are a ton out there. Do some reading, do some research. If you want some recommendations, email me and I can work with you to help you find something. But those password management apps, the great thing about them is they allow you to use extremely complex passwords for all your sites, a different password for each site, and allow you to get access to them with one password. Now you're probably saying, wait a minute, is that very smart to give one company access to all your passwords protected by one password? What happens if they get that password? You can also protect that information with two-factor authentication. But the way that the technology is set up is that even if someone were to get into the password management app's information, they still can't access your passwords because of the way they're encrypted. Again, go back. I have a video specifically on this, and I have a link to another video that actually talks about the technology if you really want to geek out and discover how that works. But go get a password management app right now. It's still better, no matter how you look at it, than reusing simplified passwords or using incrementing passwords. The summary in the future. Targeted attacks. This is not going to go anywhere. We are seeing police stations, hospitals, municipalities, cities, everyday businesses being targeted. This is not going to go away. Keep educating your staff. Keep making sure that your IT company is putting in the best tools possible. Awareness is going to be an uphill battle. We're doing these presentations for our elite partners, where we are doing them at least once per year. We actually have a client that we're doing them quarterly now because everything is changing so fast. So I highly recommend that getting your staff involved in some sort of program like this. If you have questions, like I said, the favorite part of my job is doing these cybersecurity presentations. So if you need someone to come out, if you need someone to present, reach out to us. Lastly, I want to talk about preparedness, and not only necessarily from an IT perspective, but from a disaster recovery and response perspective. We've been working with a lot of companies out there, a local cybersecurity law firm, a cybersecurity insurance firm, as well as even a public relations firm that specializes in cyber fallout. And these are the kind of companies that, unfortunately, a lot of people and companies contact them reactively after it's happened, but we actually have developed a disaster recovery and response template. And normally I would share this, but it's so involved that we prefer to work with businesses to put that together and talk to these businesses beforehand, so you know the do's and the don'ts when a disaster strikes. And I'm not just talking about IT disasters, or especially any sort of infiltration like we're talking here. I'm also talking fire, theft, pandemics like we're talking now. What should you be doing? Instead of figuring out while the pandemic's happening now, we would have helped you already know the list of steps. How do we get people working from home? How do we make sure they're protected? You know, if there is a breach, in the case of an IT, not malfunction, but an IT threat or an IT invasion, what are the steps we need? Are we housing sensitive client data? How do we communicate to our staff, our clients? How do we protect ourselves? Legally, what do we need to do? Those are all the things we need to talk about beforehand. So I'm really excited about that new offering that we're doing from Shield. So if you have questions about that, please let me know. And lastly, questions. So this is normally the part of the presentation where I get to do a Q&A, and typically the questions range from, things that people have seen or experienced, usually the negative, or it ranges to strange things like privacy with your cell phone and privacy with Facebook. Lots of different questions. So obviously we won't be able to do that here today, but if you do have questions, feel free to drop me a line. I highly encourage you to subscribe to, follow me on LinkedIn or follow our YouTube page to see those latest videos. They're short, I promise you. The last thing I want to do is waste your time. Watch those. They're never more than a couple of minutes, and the information in there is valuable and it's practical for everyday computer users. Anyways, you guys stay safe. I wish nothing but the best for all of your families during this COVID crisis, and we look forward to talking to you again. Take care.